Alrighty, hey, House of Kibaa fans. We just got out of the wAGMi meeting, and I just wanted to do a summary for those that couldn't be there, or for those that were that wanted to reflect on it. Plan on doing more of these for all the projects that I am a part of and that I believe in long term. This is obviously my first video on this channel. Recorded a podcast with a couple other, or a couple 809 members. I'm not an 809 member today, unfortunately, just from a economic standpoint. I hadn't taken that leap yet, but I like what Hawk is building. The Gen X's were the first 6 things I ever minted on that night. So have enjoyed the process and been involved with the kind of the stumbles along the way, and thought today's meeting was really well. I just wanted to give everyone a summary that wasn't able to be there and kind of my initial thoughts on it. So first things first, they discussed the head-on decision for Kibaa himself, making the decision to step away and refresh. I got the impression from Neil that it was probably just a combination of burnout after a grind of 18 months building a huge, enormous initiative and project that has made a really big leap in this space. And then also probably combined with the rejection, community letdown, feeling of community letdown, from the way that the pocket dimensions were received. And so I think it seemed like a good opportunity for him to step away, and hopefully he's off on vacation, getting refreshed, and decides what's best for him moving forward. I did come away, I'll say too, directly on that, feeling like this team is very much so as capable of driving forward as what moving forward. So I really appreciated that element of this, and thought the communication start to finish was spot on from the whole team. Neil went on to speak about the post pocket dimension mints to evaluate some investments that the company is making. There was a decision to lay off a portion of the company with that, while also acknowledging that they have to strategically invest and hire in other areas of the company. And so just from a pure project and company level, I think that's really interesting and important to note. It's one of the things I personally care most about as these NFT and Web3 ecosystems are built, or how the actual economics of the businesses function moving forward. So it was really, I don't want to say cool to hear of layoffs, but the reality is there are very strategic decisions being made by the organization with a long-term vision in mind that I thought was really good to hear from that perspective. Dorian spoke for the first time I remember hearing him. He spoke about his role, about Looking Glass Labs' role as it compares to House of Kibaa's. And for me, it was always very obvious just the way that org was made public. Like, they're essentially very closely aligned. House of Kibaa's Looking Glass Labs' primary business underneath that umbrella, and their definitions of long-term success are equal. If Hawk is not successful, Looking Glass Lab will not be successful. And so I thought that was just a point of clarity, I think, for the community that some people seem to not always understand based off some of my communications with them within the Discords. Dorian did mention like some regret in, I think, some of the ways he had kind of publicly complained about Top Shot's direction as a company, while also seeing how that kind of felt tone deaf against the same reactions that the Hawk community was experiencing, especially around the pocket dimension launch. I am self-guilty about trying to productively call him out like that on Twitter, but I think he addressed it really well. So I appreciated that. So just from there, those were kind of the openings, the tone of voices that were set. Ryan also spoke about some of like the marketing priorities, and just continuing to highlight that is a big priority for the org as a whole. From there, I wanted to dive in some of the projects that they directly talked about and some of the updates and key things on them, because I think that was actually some of the most exciting things that also came away. First, on Gen X. This isn't necessarily an order of priority or the way it was mentioned, but 3D PFPs had been discussed internally, more of a traditional PFP look. They're not sure everyone would want that. Some people obviously, but others might not. And so it might be a community-led decision at some point to decide if those resources get allocated to doing that, which I think would probably be a pretty heavy lift, but it might be a good marketing vehicle for Gen X long-term. one of my key questions that I asked was like, what is like the continued, the vision for like the real overlap of Gen X with House of Kibaa long term? I think it's the biggest thing that a lot of the Gen X community has felt misaligned on. I know as myself, I've kind of felt over time where I've been like, hey, all the work here that's being done is very high quality, but it just feels like incentives are misaligned. And so it was one of the reasons I asked the questions I did. And it seemed to be that there was not just a communicated real commitment to making Gen X as critical a part of the project origin, pocket dimensions. Obviously, Gen Zeros is highly correlated, not just making it involved with, but also benefiting from the growth of the ecosystem. And so they hinted at a couple things, but overall, it was a sentiment that I felt based off of the response to my question, that I felt very confident in that potential overlap more than I have for a while. Neil and Ryan both answered some direct questions specifically on that, just talking about Gen X being the priority in general, or being a priority for the long-term vision of Kibaa, of House of Kibaa. So that was the real Gen X updates. Nothing too, I think, direct. I might be missing a couple of things, but those were my notes. Second, we got Overlords. Overlords is a play-to-earn game. Is almost done. 2 to 4 weeks. It seemed Neil mentioned he was able to play it recently, but not all the cards were in there yet. So it's on the way. It will be for the same token that's going to be shared across the whole Hawk ecosystem. I always felt that was probably the most likely thing, and it may have been communicated elsewhere. I just never heard it, but it was just a point of clarity, and they did confirm that. So if you're looking at being in pocket dimensions long term, your play to earn Overlords is likely to help that together. And so I think you could really start to envision House of Kibaa as an entity being really aligned with Overlords, Gen X, as well as pocket dimension through this kind of update from me. Gen X's are going to be required to play initially. And the big vision is to make Overlords a platform for other NFT franchises to somehow be connected to and play in as well, while Gen X's kind of end up as the main beneficiary of the growth of that involvement. And the Overlords, I think, is the concept of the name of the other, potentially of the other NFT franchises that might be able to start playing in that game as well. So it's more than just a play to earn game within the context of House of Kibaa and Gen X. So moving on, we got Gen Zeros. So Gen Zeros as a series is coming. We all know that. I think the drop is actually tomorrow, which is pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to it. I'm like a 7 out of 10 sci-fi guy. I'm not going to know all the niche stuff, but I'm excited just to experience it. I love Star Wars and Star Trek. I'll say that. So that's where my 7, maybe 8 out of 10 is. So it's coming. The main goal of the Gen Zeros initiative, which was brought up by the community as kind of concerns of areas of focus, where it was basically a question like, why were resources spent towards a media thing like a Hollywood level show? And the reality is the goals are kind of three and fourfold with one ultimate success measurement. So first, it's really showing off, I think, House of Kibaa's technical abilities and adding storyline to Gen X, which does benefit, I think, the whole overarching ecosystem and adds marketing, exposure, and collateral to non-NFT people, which ultimately should be the key of any business being built in this space. I'm working on a couple of projects where most of my initiatives will probably not be the biggest attraction to the current NFT community, but the whole goal is bringing new people in because you have to long term. And so it's how can that be used as a platform to bring in new people? Totally understand that. Ultimate success is going to be measured by if Gen Zeros is picked up and funded by a major network to build into a real full-length series or movie or sequence of any of those. And then additionally, Gen Zeros, again, it's specifically going to be able to help go after like the sci-fi fans that maybe don't know a lot about the NFT world, and then vice versa, bringing the NFT people who might like sci-fi, bringing it that direction as well. So that's Gen Zeros, and coming, I think we'll see a lot more on that. The last thing that was actually mentioned with Gen Zeros is there is a mint that's going to be coming. There's been talks of like packs of cards and things related to the Gen Zeros drop, which maybe those cards are influential in Overlords. That might be a detail that's already known. I don't know the answer right now. But There will be a mint there. They talked about the fact, it was directly said, like verbatim almost, another poor mint, like, or another mint that goes poorly would do far more harm than good, which I think everyone in that room fully agreed with. And so Neil was talking about getting feedback from the community before that was done. I'm not certain of the best way to do it. I don't think asking the existing community for more ETH at the moment until some of these things start to take hold will be very productive. But we'll wait and see. And we'll tackle it as that comes. So shifting from there, we've got origin and the pocket dimensions. This is where I think probably about the same amount of time I spent on Gen X and talking about pocket dimensions. Some really interesting notes that I took away. This is origin and pocket dimensions are where it felt like, I think like 75 to 85% of the resources are moving forward with the primary focus of House of Kibaa at the moment towards how do we drive value to the existing pocket dimensions. That was one of my key takeaways from the entirety of the wAGMi. And I think in light of everything, knowing that that's the core and exclusive focus is a really good core and exclusive focus right now. Some really interesting notes for me. The tech that it was directly mentioned, the technology and computing power basically doesn't exist to support an Unreal Engine 5 experience that's a completely open experience like Ready Player One, which makes sense. I mean, Unreal Engine 5 isn't even fully out yet, and the computing capacity to power that dynamically is going to evolve over time. It'll get there. It's just not there yet. And that's why Hawks focused on the pocket dimensions, smaller communities, smaller ecosystem together to be able to pull it off and still use Unreal Engine 5 from the get-go. Makes 100% sense. And it kind of reinforces their approach currently on how do we make a social metaverse for people to interact with that is very different than the gaming-based metaverses that other metaverses are really focused on creating right now. I'm not a big gamer myself, so I fully align with that. The application to the bigger world will be really interesting over time. They mentioned the DJ's example where a DJ could have a pocket dimension built for them that is designed for people to come in and experience like a concert basically in a pocket dimension with like a certain number of people or whatnot. So really interesting there. I think takeaways on the pocket dimension approach. They did, Neil confirmed that the devs do at this moment believe there'll be ways to combine two pocket dimensions together. So if you hold multiple, you can build larger ecosystems next to each other. Pocket dimensions. So on the economics front, again, the full economics aren't fully out. The white paper does not exist yet. And they're working with like what seemed like a game economist who's probably done this for a lot of people in the past to make sure that they get that right, because you really can't undo it once you mess it up without making a lot of people angry. Hence Vitalik making Ethereum in the first place, actually, is undoing mining rewards or rewards of building in an ecosystem. So they're making sure they get that right, which I think is 100% the right move. Neil even mentioned that they vetoed a version 1 because it just wasn't good enough. I appreciated that, and I appreciated just saying that. Honestly, that was great. Pocket dimension mining rewards will be juiced for OG holders, and it will be retroactive. So down to the original date of minting, the mining rewards will, whether an airdrop of the mining rewards at that moment or something, they're going to make sure that pocket dimension mining rewards are dated back to the mint date. So don't worry about the fact they're not here yet. We don't know what they are exactly yet, but they're coming. Resources, one takeaway I had that I think was communicated differently pre-minting was that resources seem to be potentially aligned with which pocket dimension you had. I thought I was in the understanding that was not aligned in the future, which was an interesting takeaway for me, just purely to know that what pocket dimension you have might influence that. And then obviously volume, the rarity score of your pocket dimension is also another variable for the amount of resources that you'll get. That makes total sense. What was kind of hinted at, Neil did not call it out directly, and I don't know who else caught it, but as a part of that, the Genesis members who have this exclusive mint or exclusive moon dimension have the ability to not mine trees was the quote, but they are clearly a very different ecosystem than everywhere else. And basically it was hinted at there's going to be a specific resource that only the Genesis members will be able to mint on the moons. Now, as of today, that might actually mean there's more of that moon resource that will exist than any other resource, because there's no other pocket dimension that exists in excess of the 809. But long term, as some of the other resources are more common, I would imagine that those moon resources will have, in theory, an increased value, because probably in some different variation, all 10,000 of the pocket dimensions will be able to produce similar assets, if not different quantities, while the moon will be like 8% of that. Well, 8% of the total volume of the 10,000 would be able to have this unique resource. So a good callback and value add to the 809 that, again, I am not a part of today, unfortunately. Final point on pocket dimensions: the future pocket dimensions may be distributed in 3 ways. That was directly called out. I think all of us knew all of these things, except for the third. 1, strategic partner launches. Basically, hey, we'll pre-bill you a pocket dimension that accomplishes something for you. It's a way to get pocket dimensions in the hands of people that will use it. The DJ example was the one that mentioned here, or that was mentioned here first. 2, opening back up to public sales at some point. They did directly call out with high amounts of caution to basically not hurt the existing community of holders and just the existing community of Hawk in general, which I think is of utmost importance. If you've got an appreciating asset where Hawk dimensions get worth 2, 3, 4 ETH, and maybe in the future, potentially way more than that at some point, introducing new dimensions at a far lower price point might be an issue. So I think that'll be a checks and balance and community involvement. I think a way to do that long term is going to make sure if there is a release of pocket dimension lands, figuring out how does that get rewarded back to the existing holders. Is that in the form of a resource drop? Is that in the form of, hey, if we're going to sell 2,000 more, we're going to make 2,000 available to the current ones, either at a discounted price or maybe just airdrop. I don't know. I mean, that'd be obviously, I think a lot of our holders would feel really confident. I have a fjord, by the way, just one fjord. The final point though on this was that the pocket dimensions were likely to potentially be mintable using the in-game economic resources and jewels. So what you can get from the jewel drops, which as of this moment, I think are only from House of the Genesis holders, but also using the in-game resources, the in-minting resource, or the in-mining resources of the pocket dimensions can be used to generate that, generate another pocket dimension for holders, which I think is another good, it is a good way of distributing the existing groups to existing holders and reward existing holders. So that's basically the summary of the call. There's a lot of Q&As, but probably about an hour of Q&A after the start, talking about the project updates. I think in general, I think my main takeaway is there's increased confidence on my part of the team that is here to lead this and recognize there's a shift that was necessary, the shifts that have been made in the approach, and there's a continued acknowledgement of alignment with core NFT holders that feels renewed. I'll say, I don't think it was ever zero, but I think it's renewed, and at the very least being communicated more, a lot more. And the communication was really appreciated. Just at a pure communications level, it was a well done event for everybody. That's actually all I had. The last 2 notes we already hit on. So I hope this was helpful. If you weren't there, or if you were there, if you just wanted to recap, I can share my notes too if that's helpful. It's going to be my first video on this channel, so I hope you enjoy it. Feel free to give feedback if this was helpful, if it was bad. If you hate the fact my background is boring as hell, I get it. I don't like it either. That'll change over time. But again, thank you for listening, and let's go build the House of Kibaa that we all know and love and want to make a real reality. So thanks, guys.